They say you can measure a man's heart not by the size of his house, but by the warmth he shows to the people who keep that house alive. I learned that truth inside a mansion that could fit a city block. On the morning a billionaire fired the woman who had just saved his daughter's life. It began before dawn, when the world still held its breath. The estate slept under a blanket of early mist, the fountains frozen mid-gesture, the lawns jeweled with dew. Inside, every hallway hummed faintly with machines designed to keep perfection intact. Filters sighing, clocks whispering, sensors blinking like watchful eyes. And then, through all that careful silence, a sound too human to ignore broke free. A small, frightened cry. Elena heard it before anyone else. She always did. Years of tending to other people's children had taught her to recognize the thin edge between a dream and distress. She was on her feet before thought could catch up with instinct, robe pulled tight around her, bare feet slapping against marble. By the time she reached little Mia's room, the cry had turned into a weak moan. The thermometer told its story in digits that seemed far too loud. 101.3. Not catastrophic, not yet, but enough to tilt the day. Elena's stomach dropped. She brushed Mia's curls aside, touched her cheek, felt the heat blooming under soft skin. "You'll be all right," she whispered, more prayer than statement. Downstairs, the first floor was already awake in its own cold way. Lights brightened automatically as Alexander Hale walked through, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand adjusting the cuff of a charcoal suit worth more than the average car. He moved with the rhythm of someone who didn't believe in stopping. His chef hovered nearby, awaiting approval for breakfast he wouldn't eat. Elena called to him from the staircase, voice careful but urgent. "Sir, Mia's running a fever." He turned, irritation flickering across features that magazines called perfect. "How high?" 101.3. "She's flushed, shivering. I think—" He cut her off gently but firmly. "Call the pediatrician. I can't miss this flight." "Just one day," she tried. "It might get worse." He sighed, the kind of sigh that meant the conversation was over. "Elena, we've talked about this. I can't cancel Tokyo. The board's waiting. You know what to do if she gets worse. Charge whatever you need." He left a black credit card on the marble counter, the modern version of leaving bread by the door. And then he was gone, stride echoing down the corridor, the slam of the car door punctuating the end of discussion. Upstairs, Mia's eyes fluttered open. "Daddy?" Elena forced a smile. "He'll call soon, sweetheart. Close your eyes." The lie stung. Hours crawled. The fever hovered, stubborn and proud. Elena mixed cool water with lavender, dabbed Mia's forehead, coaxed her to sip. Each small act felt both meaningless and monumental. The mansion, normally alive with staff, had shrunk to a quiet battlefield between one woman's will and one child's illness. Around noon, thunder began rehearsing somewhere beyond the hills. Mrs. Grant, the housekeeper, glided in like a judgment wearing pearls. "Still fussing over a little temperature?" she muttered. "Children need to fight off things on their own." Elena didn't respond. She'd learned that silence was armor. By mid-afternoon, the number rose again. 102.7. She left another message for Dr. Patel. She hummed lullabies from her village in the mountains, songs that didn't need translation. The house smelled of menthol and worry. At 6, the doctor returned her call. His voice steadied her like a hand on the shoulder. "Cold compresses, hydration, small sips every 15 minutes. If it hits 103 and stays there, call me back. I'll come." When evening fell, lightning stitched white scars across the sky. The fever touched 102.9. Elena worked through the night, wiping sweat, changing sheets, whispering stories about stars that never burned out. She didn't notice when the power flickered. She was too busy holding the child's hand, feeling the tiny pulse fight back. 3 in the morning found her at the window, rocking the girl wrapped in blankets, letting the storm's wind cool their faces. Her eyelids burned, but she refused the luxury of rest. "You'll be fine," she murmured. "Just stay with me." When dawn returned, so did hope. Thin, trembling but present. The thermometer dropped half a degree. She smiled at that small mercy, unaware that the cameras hidden in each corner were quietly recording every heartbeat of her vigil. Day blurred into day. Alexander's voice arrived from Tokyo through the phone, crisp and businesslike. "How's she now?" "Better for a few hours, then warm again," Elena said softly. "Keep monitoring. I'll be home in 2 days." The line clicked dead before she could ask him to come sooner. That evening the fever spiked again. 104. Elena's pulse raced. She dialed Dr. Patel. "I'm on my way," he said. He arrived within the hour, rain dripping from his coat, eyes kind behind tired glasses. "You've done well," he told her after examining the girl. "This is the hard part. You need to cool her slowly. Lukewarm bath, small sips of fluid. And you," he looked at Elena, "must rest or you'll collapse." She nodded, but rest was a language she no longer spoke. The bath took forever. Mia whimpered at the touch of water, and Elena sang softly until the whimpers turned into quiet breaths. The numbers began to fall, slow as forgiveness. 103.5. 103.1. Each descent felt like a victory. Hours later, she nearly fainted. The edges of the room folded in like dark curtains. She steadied herself against the sink, drew a shaking breath, and whispered, "Not yet." Her reflection looked back, pale and fierce. She kept going. When morning came again, the third in this silent war, the fever hovered near 101. Elena almost wept with relief. She fed the child spoonfuls of broth, kissed her hair, whispered gratitude to no one in particular. The house brightened. Even the rain seemed to soften. But exhaustion is a thief that waits patiently. After 72 hours of vigilance, Elena's body claimed its debt. She sat beside the bed, watching the rhythm of a little chest rise and fall, and promised herself she'd rest only 5 minutes. Her head drooped. Her hand still lay across Mia's blanket. She was asleep before the clock's second hand completed its circle. That was the moment Alexander returned. The jet landed just after sunrise. He stepped out into a world washed clean by rain, confident, impatient, already checking messages. The car carried him through gates that opened like obedient servants. Inside, staff lined up in quiet readiness. Mrs. Grant greeted him with a practiced smile. Welcome home, sir. Miss Mia is upstairs with the nanny." He took the stairs 2 at a time. The house smelled faintly of eucalyptus and detergent, and something else. Calm. He pushed open the nursery door. Sunlight fell across the room, revealing the scene that would ignite his temper. His daughter slept peacefully, and beside her, the nanny dozed in a chair, head tilted back, lips parted in sheer exhaustion. For a heartbeat, pride and relief collided inside him, then anger won. He saw not sacrifice but negligence, not devotion but laziness. Years of building empires had taught him to distrust what he couldn't measure, and what he saw now was a metric of failure. "Elena," he said sharply. She startled awake, blinking, disoriented. "Sir, she's better. The fever." "I found you sleeping on the job." His tone cut the air. "You're dismissed." Her throat tightened. "Please, she was burning for 3 days. I don't pay excuses." The words hung there, final as a door closing. Mrs. Grant appeared behind him, arms folded, expression smug. "Shall I prepare her check, sir?" He nodded once. Elena's knees almost gave out. She looked to the bed where Mia still slept, cheeks finally cool, breath steady. She bent, brushed a kiss against the child's forehead, and whispered so softly even the cameras barely caught it. "Be well, my little star." Then she walked out, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the mansion's emptiness. If you believe in second chances, comment the country you're watching from right now, because this story isn't finished, not even close. The door closed behind Elena, and silence took the place of her footsteps. For a long while Alexander stood in that silence, waiting for the comfort of certainty to arrive. It didn't. The room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and warm linen. The faint hiss of the humidifier whispered through the pause between his breaths. He told himself he had done the right thing. He'd maintained discipline, drawn a line. That's what leaders did. But leaders weren't fathers, and fathers weren't supposed to feel this hollow after being right. Downstairs, the house returned to its routines. Staff hurried to erase evidence of conflict, replacing used towels and empty medicine bottles before the master could see them. Mrs. Grant supervised every motion, her satisfaction disguised as efficiency. She told the maids, "The man needs order. He can't afford sentimentality." The words were meant for others, but she spoke them loud enough for the security cameras to hear, as if she were defending herself to an unseen jury. Alexander ate alone in the breakfast room. The eggs had cooled. He pushed the plate away and opened his laptop, chasing solace in numbers. But behind the glow of the screen, an image kept intruding. Elena slumped in that chair, the child's hand near hers. He blinked it away, pretending irritation was hunger, and asked the chef for more coffee. The taste of it was ash. By noon, news of the firing had traveled through every corridor. The chauffeur heard it from the gardener. The gardener heard it from Mrs. Grant. "She fell asleep while the little one was ill," they said. Each retelling sharpened the accusation. By the time it reached the laundry room, Elena had supposedly endangered the child's life. Gossip was a kind of wildfire in rich houses. It burned prettily, feeding on nothing but air. In her small apartment above the carriage house, Elena sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing the clothes she'd left in. She stared at her hands, hands that had cooled a fever, steadied a trembling body, written careful notes through the night, and wondered how they could suddenly mean nothing. Outside, the rain that had followed her from the mansion softened into drizzle. She listened to it, counting breaths the way she used to count heartbeats. Alexander spent the afternoon pacing between calls. Every time he glanced toward the staircase, a weight pressed behind his ribs. He tried to justify it. Rules were rules. One act of negligence could have cost a life. But a quieter thought asked if he had really seen negligence or just exhaustion. When he passed the nursery again, Mia was awake. The little girl blinked up at him, eyes still glazed from fever. "Where's Lena?" she asked. He froze. She's not here, sweetheart. Daddy's home now." Mia frowned, confusion clouding her small face. "She sings to me." He forced a smile. "Daddy can sing too." But when he tried, the sound that came out was cracked and tuneless, and Mia turned her face toward the wall. He stood there a moment longer, feeling smaller than the child's shadow on the blanket. That night he worked late, pretending busyness could drown the echo of her question. Outside his study window, the sky bruised into indigo. In the reflection he saw himself, a man with everything except peace. He poured another drink, watched amber light fold through the glass, and whispered into the emptiness, "I did what I had to." The room didn't believe him. In the servants' quarters, the stories changed tone. Some said the nanny had cursed the house with her tears. Others said Alexander would regret losing her. Even Mrs. Grant, alone in her own room, found herself replaying the moment. She'd seen the exhaustion in Elena's face and ignored it. She told herself it wasn't her job to defend another woman's mercy. Still, sleep didn't come easily. At 3 a.m, Alexander walked the hallway outside Mia's room. The child coughed once, a soft echo. He opened the door quietly. The nightlight painted everything gold. The empty chair beside the bed waited like an accusation. He sat there, trying to imagine what it had been like for Elena to keep vigil while the fever raged. He pictured her dozing off with her hands still on the blanket, waking at every sigh. The thought made his throat tighten. He reached for his phone to call the security chief. Habit, reflex. Then he stopped. What would he say? Check footage? Why? Because his heart felt wrong? He set the phone down. Pride was still stronger than curiosity. Morning came with a bright sun that felt almost cruel. Mrs. Grant brought the day's schedule, calls, meetings, a lunch with investors. He nodded mechanically, though his thoughts kept circling the same quiet place. When she mentioned hiring a replacement nanny, he waved her off. Later, he said. Not yet. The mansion, built for power, began to feel like a museum of regret. Every corridor carried a faint echo of what it had just lost. Even the security cameras blinked in the corners as if waiting for someone to ask them what they knew. Elena spent that same morning packing a single suitcase. She didn't own much. Some clothes, a stack of letters from her parents, a photograph of Mia drawing in chalk on the terrace last spring. She traced the picture with her thumb and whispered, "You'll forget me soon." She didn't believe it, but saying it made leaving easier. She wrote a short note to Dr. Patel, thanking him for coming on such short notice and apologizing if she'd caused any trouble. He replied within minutes, "You did everything right, Elena. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She smiled through tears she thought she'd already spent. Meanwhile, in the heart of the mansion, Alexander tried to start his morning routine. Meetings, phone calls, polite smiles. But each time he said his daughter's name, something in his chest tightened. Around lunchtime, he caught a glimpse of the nursery monitor. The child slept again, peaceful. On the desk beside her bed lay the small leather notebook Elena had kept. He hadn't noticed it before. It was filled with neat handwriting, times, temperatures, notes about hydration, tiny hearts drawn beside each improvement. At the bottom of the last page she'd written, "Fever finally breaking, thank God." He closed the book quickly, as if it had burned him. The guilt he'd been trying to drown all morning surfaced, steady and undeniable. He spent the rest of the day wandering the house like a man looking for something he'd misplaced. Every room reminded him of her. The faint scent of lavender where she'd folded blankets. The mug she always used, still drying on the rack. The echo of a song hummed down the hall during bath time. He realized then that efficiency had never kept his daughter safe. It had only made the house quiet enough for fear to echo. That night, after Mia was asleep, he found himself outside the security room again. The door stood half open. Screens glowed in the dark, displaying the last 72 hours of the mansion's life. He stared at the rows of footage, thousands of moments reduced to squares of light, and felt the first real tremor of doubt. He almost walked away. Almost. But something inside whispered that maybe the truth he'd been avoiding was sitting right there, waiting for him to press play. The door to the security room breathed a faint draft into the corridor, the kind of breath a house takes when it knows a secret and waits for someone to be brave enough to hear it. Alexander stood there longer than a man like him usually tolerated standing anywhere. He wasn't used to pausing on thresholds. He was used to entering, deciding, exiting, but his hand stayed at his side, and the light from the screens laid pale fences across his shoes. He told himself he had work, calls, a life engineered to leave no room for uncertainty. And yet uncertainty had already moved in, sitting heavy in the center of his chest the way a child sits in the middle of a room when she wants to be noticed and doesn't know how to ask. He turned away without pushing the door fully open. Cowardice is a small word for a large feeling. He told himself it was discretion. He told himself there was nothing there he didn't already know. He told himself a dozen small lies men use to smooth over a day. Then he walked down the corridor toward his daughter's room, and every lie untied itself in the wake of his footsteps, like little ropes failing under strain. Mia was awake, eyes glazed with the afterlight of fever, one hand absently patting the sheet beside her, the place where a familiar palm had rested for nights. He sat, awkward in a chair that didn't feel like it had been made for him. He tried to make his voice gentle, but it came out the way voices do when they haven't been practiced for gentleness. A little rough, a little unsure. The girl's lashes fluttered. She looked past him toward the doorway where absence made a shape only children see clearly. He didn't have the right stories, and he knew it. He only had promises that sounded like schedules. He stroked her hair, and the motion felt like an apology he hadn't learned how to say. He stayed there a long time, because staying was the only sentence that made sense. When she drifted back to sleep, he stood and let the quiet talk to him. It mentioned the leather notebook again, the one he'd closed too quickly, as if paper could incriminate him. He picked it up and opened it carefully, the way you lift the lid from a music box you're not sure is finished. The pages were a map of 72 hours, numbers, times, notes, tiny observations that could only have been made by someone who refused to look away. He found a line written at an hour that felt like a bruise, 3:21 a.m., bath tepid, singing reduced shivers, 2 sips taken, temp down to 102.2, stay awake. Beneath it, smaller letters like a whisper to herself, don't sit too long, stand or you'll sleep. He closed his eyes. It was like finding a diary of devotion written in a language he should have learned years ago. He took the notebook with him, not because he had the right to, but because it felt like a small anchor in a sea that had started heaving without his permission. Downstairs, meetings waited. Investors waited. A call with Tokyo blinked on his screen, and he blinked back, unprepared for a morning where he was the one who couldn't be reached. He answered anyway, his voice wearing the mask it had worn for decades. Numbers, targets, expansion in 2 emerging markets. His tongue remembered the choreography. But between sentences, his eyes kept dropping to the page where she had written, at 5:17 a.m. Child's hand found mine in sleep. Fever loosening. Keep voice low. The room relies on softness. He said the phrase, aggressive timeline, into a speaker, and the words turned to dust in his mouth. When the call ended, he didn't move. He thought of his wife for the first time in weeks in a way that wasn't attached to grief like a stone. The accident had taken her fast. Grief had taken him slow. He remembered the way she had once told him, half joking, half heartbroken, that he confused urgency with importance. He had laughed then, the way men laugh when they're being warned by love. Now the warning arrived with a bill. He thought about the morning after the funeral, when he had held Mia and promised the child a life of plenty, because he didn't know how to promise anything else. He thought about the quiet ways he had tried to replace presents with provision, stacking gifts in corners like furniture in empty rooms. He had built a fortress out of efficiency and called it a home. Now a woman with a cardigan and a soft voice had shown him, in 3 nights, what a home is built from. And he had fired her for sleeping in a chair. He stood abruptly, the way you stand when the body finally rebels against shame's inertia. He walked the length of the gallery because motion sometimes fools the mind into believing it is progress. Portraits looked down, old eyes full of other men's mistakes. He paced once, twice, like a penitent rehearsing a confession he still hoped he could avoid. He thought of calling his lawyer to ask what rehiring someone under apology looked like on paper, and the absurdity of the thought stopped him. How many of his solutions had started with a retainer fee? He almost laughed. It came out as a rough breath that tasted like salt. He went to work anyway, because habit is a cruel king. In the boardroom, screens filled with the lives of other people's money. He nodded, agreed, suggested, redirected. The mastery he wore in rooms like this felt extra bright today, as if it had been polished to distract him. Every decisive sentence rebounded off the glass and came back with a question mark attached. Between presentations, he stared at a chart that meant nothing and saw instead the exact angle of Elena's shoulder as she leaned over the bath to keep a small back from shivering too hard. He shook his head once, a man trying to clear a fog that wasn't weather. Someone asked him a question that used to be his favorite kind, urgent, difficult, solvable. He answered it correctly. It felt like cheating on a test that no longer mattered. By late afternoon, he had run out of avoidance. It doesn't happen like an epiphany. It's more like a rope that finally snaps after you've hung too much weight from it. He found himself walking the corridor towards security without deciding to. His hand found the door edge again. He pushed it open, just a little. Inside, the head of security looked up the way a man looks up when the boss comes in for reasons that won't fit in a report. Alexander cleared his throat. He heard his own voice and didn't recognize the shape of it. "Pull up the last 3 days in the nursery," he said, and the sentence fell into the room the way a stone falls into a lake, fast, quiet, and then spreading circles of consequence. The security chief nodded, fingers moving across keys with the brisk competence of someone whose job is to retrieve indisputable truth. The wall blossomed into squares, each one a window into time. The chief selected the one that belonged to the nursery and rolled the footage back to the very beginning of the first morning. Then he stepped away, because there are moments when another man's privacy is a mercy you can give him. Alexander sat. The chair felt wrong under him. The room felt too cold. His lungs felt like they had to work for each breath. He pressed play. The screen showed an hour he remembered only as an email blast and 2 phone calls. There was Elena, entering the frame in a blur of robe and bare feet, going straight to the bed without checking the camera or the mirror or anything except the child's face. He watched her press the back of her hand to Mia's forehead, then the thermometer, then push hair away with the tenderness of a mother who has learned how to make touch do the work of medicine. He saw himself downstairs on another feed, back straight, mouth moving, leaving a card on the counter like a placeholder for affection. He flinched, as if the screen had reached out and slapped him. He fast-forwarded, then slowed again when the bath began. The image had no sound, but the room he was in filled with noise anyway. His own heartbeat, his breath stumbling a little, the phantom of a lullaby that memory supplied. The water steamed just enough to fog the edge of the camera's lens. Elena held the child the way you hold something that could break even though you'll never let it. He watched the motions. Pour, pause, check, adjust temperature, pour again. As if watching a choreography he had commissioned for a ballet but never bothered to attend. He leaned forward without meaning to, like a man at a window looking out at weather he didn't know could be this beautiful even while it was terrible. He let it run. Night came. He saw the moment the power blinked and the candle kept the room honest. He saw Elena stand, then sit, then stand again. A soldier who knew the enemy was not dramatic but persistent. He saw her head dip and jerk back up, dip again, hands clenching the chair arms, a mouth shaping words you didn't need sound to understand. Stay awake. He watched the clock in the bottom corner of the screen crawl through hours that most people only meet from the safe side of a pillow. He saw her carry the child to the balcony for a ribbon of cool air and hold her there until the little chest found a calmer rhythm. He realized he was holding his own breath. He fast-forwarded, then stopped again when the doctor arrived. He saw the talk, the checking, the small nods exchanged between professionals who both respected the fact that caring is labor. He watched Elena write, and he knew without zooming in that the words would be the ones that had bruised his heart earlier. He kept watching. He watched the tepid bath again, the way exhaustion made her sway, and the way resolve made her feet plant themselves. He watched her nearly fall and choose not to. He watched the child's hand reach for hers in sleep. He watched Elena look at that hand, like the world had just offered her the only payment she would accept. He reached up and touched the screen. His fingers met cold glass. The image didn't change, of course, but something inside him did, the way a misaligned bone gives under pressure and clicks home. He let the footage roll into the morning of the third day, when the shadow under Elena's eyes had turned from a smudge into a second pair of lids, and the fever had begun to loosen its stubborn teeth. He watched himself enter the frame, watched his own mouth sharpen into judgment, watched his own hand cut the air in dismissal like a guillotine. He didn't look away, because if he looked away now, he would have to look away for the rest of his life. He paused the video on the frame where Elena's head had just lifted from the chair, where her hand still lay across the blanket, where her face wore the expression of a person whose body has stopped and whose duty hasn't. He sat there while the screen waited, the way a confessional waits for words. Then he hit play again and followed his mistake all the way out of the room, down the corridor, to the door where the woman he'd just wronged disappeared from view. He sat very still. The security chief stood at a respectful distance, eyes on a different screen, pretending he wasn't witnessing a man lose and find himself in 30 silent minutes. The hum of the servers filled the room. Somewhere 2 floors up, a child turned over in her sleep and sighed, the sound arriving here only as a ripple on a green bar that marked ambient noise. The world went on. The man in the chair did not. There is a moment in some lives when remorse stops being a feeling and becomes a plan. He felt that moment arrive like a click in the spine. He stood slowly, because some rises shouldn't be rushed. He thanked the security chief in a voice that made the other man look at him twice, and then he walked out carrying nothing but the truth, which is to say, he walked out heavier than he had ever been, and lighter than he could remember. He went first to the nursery. He needed to see the room as it was now, not as it had been on a screen. Sun sharpened the edges of everything. The chair looked smaller. The bed looked safer. The little leather notebook lay where he had left it, open to the last page, the last line. He read it again. Thank God. He whispered the words once, trying them on like a garment from someone else's closet, and found they fit. Mia stirred. Her lashes lifted. She looked at him. For a second he saw confusion, then recognition, then a question she didn't know how to phrase. He sat and reached for her hand the way he had seen it done. Her fingers wrapped around his thumb, trusting by reflex. He swallowed. He told her, softly, that he would be right back. He said he needed to fix something. The sentence surprised him with how much of his life it contained. He walked the hall, and every portrait seemed to step out of its frame to watch him pass. He found Mrs. Grant in the kitchen, speaking quietly to a maid about schedules. He asked for Elena's address. She hesitated because control had been her partner for years. He waited because he had learned something about waiting in the last hour. She retrieved the information from a folder she kept for everything she could own with paper. He took it and thanked her, and the thanks landed between them like rain in a dry season. Unfamiliar, a little shocking, and necessary. He stopped once more in his study to pick up a pen. Not because he needed it, but because doing something with his hands kept his mind from breaking into useless shards. He wrote 3 words on a small card and slipped it into his pocket, as if a sentence could be a talisman. He told the driver to bring the car around, then changed his mind and walked. The distance from the main house to the old carriage building wasn't far, but it offered space for the future to catch up. The path was lined with boxwood cut to strict shapes, the kind of landscaping that promises order. Beyond the hedges, a late rose had refused to quit and offered a bloom as if to say, rebellion can be tender. He touched a petal with the back of his finger, the way he had seen Elena test bathwater. The color held. He kept going. At the foot of the small building he stopped and looked up at the window with the plant on the sill. A curtain moved. Maybe the draft. Maybe a woman who had learned to expect nothing from knocks on doors that had already closed on her. He climbed the steps and lifted his hand and brought it down against the wood once, twice, 3 times, each knock a syllable in a word he finally knew how to pronounce. He waited. The door did not open at once because doors guarding dignity take an extra second to consider the world outside. He was ready to wait longer. For a man who had built his fortune on speed, the waiting felt like medicine. The handle turned. He lifted his head. His mouth forgot every speech it had ever given to win rooms, deals, donors, headlines. What he had now was not a speech. It was a truth that was going to have to learn how to be spoken out loud. He said her name the way you say a prayer you found scratched into the back of a pew. He told her he had watched the tapes. He told her he had seen what love looks like when it is tired and keeps going anyway. He told her he had made a mistake big enough to be a landmark in his life, and he was here to ask for directions. He didn't rush. He didn't bargain. He didn't hire words to work for him. He let each sentence earn its weight. Elena listened the way people listen when they have been misjudged and have learned caution as a second language. Her eyes were swollen from a sleep that had finally caught her for a few hours. She stood with one hand on the edge of the door, as if the wood could be a spine while she tried to decide if the world had changed or only the light. He kept speaking until he ran out of anything except silence and the movement of his chest. When he finished, there was a space where a lesser man would have put a bribe. He left the space alone. She stepped back and led him into the small apartment that smelled faintly of lavender and bread. He saw the photograph on the table of Mia drawing with chalk, the hair ribbon on a chair, the book with a slip of paper marking a place she had tried to reach between hours of tending other people's needs. He saw the plant in the window stretching toward a light that sometimes didn't arrive. He told her what he wanted to do now. He told her it was not to bring her back as an employee, but to bring her back as a partner in the project of raising a child, a project he finally understood required more than a calendar and a budget. He told her he had words that could be notarized and words that could not, and that the second kind mattered more than the first, but he would do both. He told her he had a wing of the house that needed a heart, and if she said no, he would understand, but he would not stop trying to become the kind of man who asked better questions before he gave final answers. She didn't respond at once. She made tea, because rituals keep people from tipping over in the presence of great change. He held the mug with both hands, because this was not a moment for hands that held nothing. She asked him 2 or 3 questions that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with habits. He answered without flinching, because the tapes had left him no room for flinching. The room warmed. The steam curled. A bird argued with its own echo in the garden. The world, which had been sharp all day, softened and came back into focus as something you could live in. When he finally stood to leave, he told her he would wait for her answer, and he meant the word wait for the first time in his life. He walked back toward the big house with steps that felt like they belonged to a different man, not because the terrain had changed, but because he had. At the top of the path, he stopped and looked over his shoulder. The window with the plant glowed. He put his hand to his chest and realized his heart had been carrying 2 weights and had set one down. Inside, the corridors didn't feel like a museum anymore. They felt like hallways in a place where people lived and learned and made mistakes and fixed them in full view of the walls that would remember. He went to his daughter. He sat. He let his hand rest on the blanket the way he had seen it done. He whispered to her that he was trying, and she pressed her cheek into the pillow the way children do when they know something good has shifted, even if they don't know the words for it. Downstairs, he found the security chief and told him thank you again. The man nodded, surprised to find gratitude a part of his day. Alexander then called the doctor and apologized without explanation, because not every apology needs a map to be sincere. He called his lawyer and said he needed documents that protected someone other than himself. He told Mrs. Grant he would speak with her in the morning, and the tone suggested a conversation about the difference between protocol and kindness. He shut his study door and sat with the card he had written earlier. On it were 3 words: I was wrong. He put the card away because he didn't need a talisman anymore. He needed a practice. That night, for the first time since his wife died, he slept without the television on. He dreamt nothing he could remember. He woke before dawn with a certainty that made him grateful and afraid in equal measure. He looked at the little leather notebook on his desk and decided it would stay there forever, not as a penance, but as a compass. He went to the window and watched the half-light lift the garden into its shapes. Somewhere in the distance, a door opened and closed softly. Footsteps on gravel. A rhythm he was already learning by heart. He didn't move when he heard those footsteps, not right away. He just stood there, hands folded against the window frame, watching the first veins of gold streak the morning sky. For the first time in years, Alexander Hale allowed the quiet to linger without rushing it. The house around him was still, a cathedral built from regret and second chances. The footsteps outside grew closer, slow and hesitant. When the knock came, it was soft, 3 taps, almost questioning. He opened the door before the third one finished, and there she was. Elena looked smaller than he remembered, though maybe that was guilt shrinking the space between them. Her cardigan was the same faded one she'd worn that first morning, her hair tied back, her eyes cautious but no longer wounded. Behind her, the air smelled of rain and early sun. I came, she said simply. The words trembled on the edge between courage and exhaustion. He stepped aside. I didn't think you would. I almost didn't, she admitted. But she needs me. And maybe, she paused, the way a heart pauses before forgiveness. Maybe you do too. The sentence hit him harder than any accusation could have. He nodded, unable to speak, and motioned her inside. The moment her feet crossed the threshold, the mansion exhaled, as though the house itself had been waiting for her to come home. Mia's laughter broke the silence before either of them could fill it. The little girl was already running down the staircase, hair wild from sleep, her small hands clutching the railing. "Lena!" she squealed, voice cracked but alive. Elena dropped to her knees, arms open, catching the child mid-run. The sound that followed wasn't words. It was relief turned into laughter and tears all at once. Alexander watched them, his throat closing around 100 unsaid apologies. When Elena finally looked up, the edges of her eyes shone. "She's lighter," she said softly. "Her color's back. He nodded. She slept through the night. I think she knew you'd come. They stayed like that for a while, the three of them in one fragile triangle of light, until the child's energy folded into contentment, her head resting against Elena's shoulder. Breakfast that morning was different. The long table, once a cold monument to wealth, felt smaller. Alexander had told the chef to prepare something simple, scrambled eggs, fruit, toast. But when Elena offered to make pancakes the way Mia liked them, he didn't argue. She moved through the kitchen like she'd never left, humming under her breath. The smell of butter and vanilla filled the room. Mia sat on the counter, swinging her legs, laughing each time the pancake flipped. Alexander leaned against the doorway, watching. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen sunlight move through the kitchen windows like that, warm instead of sterile. When Elena noticed him, she smiled, a careful smile but real. "Would you like one?" she asked. He almost said no, the way men who don't know how to accept kindness often do, but he stopped himself. "Yes," he said instead. "Please." That single word, please, felt like learning to breathe again. For the rest of the day, the house seemed to shed layers of frost. The staff moved quietly, glancing at the trio with something that looked like relief. Even Mrs. Grant kept her distance, though Alexander could see the worry etched in her face. Worry about what forgiveness would mean for her. Later, he found her in the corridor outside his study. "Mrs. Grant," he said, voice calm, "we need to talk." Her hands twisted together. "Yes, sir." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "You've been with us a long time. You've run this house efficiently. But sometimes efficiency forgets the reason we serve. I did. You followed my lead." She looked startled. "Sir, I only did what I thought." "I know," he interrupted gently. "We both did. But from now on, I expect compassion to be the first rule here. If you see someone acting out of care, don't measure it as weakness. Measure it as strength." Her lips parted, then closed again. She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He offered a small smile. "Thank you. And take tomorrow off. Go see your sister in the city. You've earned it." When she left, the door closed on decades of unspoken hierarchy. Alexander leaned back, letting the quiet settle. The house felt lighter already. That evening, he stood by the garden with Elena. The sky was bruising into twilight, streaks of violet fading into indigo. Fireflies stitched small lights across the hedges. Mia ran between them, arms wide, chasing magic she didn't need to catch to believe in. "She reminds me of her mother," Elena said softly. Alexander's gaze followed the child. "Every day," he whispered, "even the stubbornness." Elena laughed, and it was a sound he didn't realize he'd missed. Then her laughter faded. "You loved her deeply, didn't you?" "I still do," he said, "but I think I spent years grieving the wrong things. Her death, yes, but also the life I didn't know how to continue. I thought building an empire would fill the space she left." "And did it?" He shook his head. "No, it just made the silence richer." They stood together, saying nothing for a long time. The night hummed around them, crickets and wind sharing their own conversation. When he finally turned to her, his voice was quieter. "Elena, I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway." She looked at him, searching. "You don't need to deserve it," she said. "You just need to do better with it." That line, the simplicity of it, sank into him deeper than any sermon could have. He nodded once, a promise made not in words but in intent. As the days turned into weeks, the change became visible. The mansion that had once felt like a fortress grew into something resembling a home. The laughter of a child began to echo through halls that had forgotten sound. Elena's presence softened everything. Meals turned into conversations. The staff smiled again. And even Alexander learned the rhythm of small joys. Some nights he would read to Mia while Elena sat knitting by the window. Other nights he'd find Elena in the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed, quietly making soup for tomorrow, humming that same tune. He'd watch her for a moment before saying goodnight, too grateful to disturb the peace she carried with her. The guilt never vanished entirely. It lived under his ribs like a shadow. But it became something else, a reminder, a compass. And with each passing day, he tried to live in a way that made the apology permanent. Weeks later, he called Elena to his study. She entered cautiously, still wary of grand gestures. He handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I should have done a long time ago," he said. "Legal paperwork. It grants you guardianship rights if anything ever happens to me. And it gives you a home here, officially. No one can take that from you." Her hand trembled. "Alexander, I can't." "You already did," he interrupted. "You saved my daughter. You saved me. This is just me trying to catch up." Tears filled her eyes. She didn't speak, only nodded, holding the paper as if it might vanish. That night, after Mia fell asleep, the two adults found themselves on the balcony outside her room. The city below shimmered with lights that looked small and distant, like memories you could almost reach. Elena leaned against the railing, her hair moving with the breeze. "She'll remember this," she said. "Not the fever, not the fear, just this feeling, safe, loved." Alexander smiled faintly. "I hope so. She will," Elena whispered, "because children remember the warmth, not the storm." He turned toward her, the lines around his eyes softening. "You always know what to say." "No," she said, meeting his gaze. "I just say what I needed to hear once." For a while they watched the stars scatter across the sky. The house behind them glowed gently, no longer the cold monument it used to be, but a home, finally full of stories worth telling. And if you're watching this, if you've ever judged someone too quickly, or thought a single moment could define who they are, ask yourself, would you have checked the CCTV first? Drop your answer below, because somewhere tonight, someone is being misunderstood. Someone's kindness is being mistaken for failure. And if this story reaches you in time, maybe you'll remember to look twice before you decide what you see. He woke before the sun and didn't reach for his phone. That alone told you the man had changed. The house stretched around him like a creature roused from a long sleep. Not a museum of wealth, but a place where small sounds, footsteps, kettles, breath, finally meant something. He stood at the window and watched the garden loosen its shadows. Somewhere a door clicked softly, the way a promise clicks into place when you mean it. He thought of all the mornings he'd sprinted past his own life to make a meeting, and how one slow minute now felt like a gift he wouldn't trade for a contract. He made a list, but not the kind that once ruled him. It had 4 lines. Apologize in front of everyone. Make protection permanent. Ask forgiveness without trying to buy it. Learn to stay. The old lists had made him taller. This one made him honest. By 8, the staff gathered in the marble foyer where announcements had always sounded like orders. They stood in a loose semicircle. Housekeepers with their hands folded, gardeners smelling faintly of wet earth, the chef in a clean jacket, Mrs. Grant with her jaw set like a lock that had forgotten the combination. Elena stood near the back, cardigan sleeves pushed to her elbows, as if she might still need to roll them up and get back to work. Mia clung to her hand, the way children make architecture out of the people they love. Alexander stepped forward without his armor. No phone, no tablet, no watch that could interrupt a confession. The light from the tall windows found the new lines around his eyes, the ones carved there by truth. He cleared his throat once, not to command silence, but to release the last of the man who had believed volume could make a case. He told them he had been wrong, not just wrong in a moment, but wrong in a way that had been building like a wall for years. He told them that he had fired a woman while she was still saving a life, that he had judged a snapshot without reading the story that came before it. He asked them to help him become the kind of man who checked the 72 hours before, not the 2 seconds after. He didn't flinch when the words struck home. He let them land. He let the room hold them. He turned to Elena and said something a man like him rarely practices out loud. He said he was sorry, without a comma. He didn't dress it in explanations or softened terms. He set the plain truth at her feet and waited to see if she might pick it up. Then he turned to Mrs. Grant and told her that compassion would be the rule of this house from now on, not an exception granted by mood or efficiency. He wasn't cruel. He didn't need to be. He asked her to be part of the change, and when her mouth trembled against a lifetime of rigid pride, he pretended not to notice and gave her time to find yes. He asked the staff for a different habit. When something seemed broken, they would look twice. When someone seemed careless, they would ask what name exhaustion was using that day. When a child cried, they would measure their response in presence first, protocol second. He said he would fail sometimes, and that failing had better not make cowards of them. He asked them to tell him when he forgot his own rule. The house, he said, could only be as gentle as the people who breathed inside it. They didn't clap. The moment wasn't built for applause. It was built for a shift so quiet you only heard it later. In the way footsteps softened on marble. In the way doors paused a second before closing. In the way names were said with care. The chef went back to the kitchen and chopped herbs as if they were confession. The cleaners returned to their carts and felt, for the first time, that polishing a banister could be a prayer. The head gardener walked to the edge of the hedges and decided to let a rose climb in the wrong direction, just to see where beauty might go if it wasn't managed. He had the papers signed that afternoon. A lawyer came and left without leaving that proprietary smell some lawyers carry, because even he could tell the documents were not the point so much as the proof. Guardianship in the event of the unthinkable. Residency without condition. A stipend that acknowledged care as work, and work as love in uniform. He handed Elena the folder like a man returns a borrowed heirloom, with both palms open. She didn't flip through it, she just nodded once, and the nod felt like a vow the house itself witnessed. He showed her the wing he hoped she would call her own. It wasn't a bribe, it was an apology in architecture. Rooms that faced morning, because she liked to start the day with light. A small library with low shelves where children's books fit as naturally as ledgers. A window seat that could hold two in a blanket. A view of the pear trees that set a different kind of wealth in spring. She walked from room to room the way a person walks through possibility, not greedily, but with a careful gratitude that blesses each threshold. When she turned back to him, she said, "It feels like someone meant it." And he realized she had just given him the highest praise he would ever receive. He didn't hire a replacement. He didn't need to fill a position anymore. He needed to share a life. They built a schedule in pencil, not because they expected chaos, but because they wanted to be kind to the days. Mornings belonged to routine, breakfast, reading, Mia stealing fruit from the cutting board while Elena pretended not to see. Afternoons were for school and therapy and play, and the quiet rituals that make a child's world make sense. Evenings were for stories and the soft closing of doors, and the two adults sitting at a table with mugs that cooled more slowly now, because no one was standing to go anywhere else. He learned to add details to his apologies. Not just, "I'm sorry," but, "I'm sorry I chose speed over care. I'm sorry I believed you were your posture in a single frame. I'm sorry I mistook money for love." He learned to apologize to his daughter without saving face, so she could learn that strength wears humility better than stubbornness. He learned to thank Elena in sentences that didn't sound like he was awarding a prize, but like he was recognizing a co-architect. The house noticed. A place like that gathers stories the way a quilt gathers warmth, and over the next months it built squares from small rescues. The night Mia woke anxious from a dream where the sun was late, and Alexander sat on the floor and drew a clock with her until the hands learned how to find each other. The morning Elena's old car coughed its last, and he handed her a key not as a benefactor, but as a man who had learned not to let pride starve a friendship. The afternoon Mrs. Grant scolded a junior housekeeper for stopping to comfort a crying Mia, and later slipped a note under the girl's door that said, "You were right to sit. I am learning." The day the gardener found Elena reading under the pear tree and brought her a basket because abundance recognizes where it is welcome. He made new rules for business too, though the board never saw the word rules on paper. He stopped starting meetings on the hour if someone in the room looked like they'd slept in a chair. He added a question to every decision. "Who does this hurt when I do it fast?" He told his assistant to block untouchable hours that belonged to a small girl, and the woman who had taught him that success without tenderness is just a better brand of loneliness. Investors noticed a gentler gravity in him. They couldn't quantify it. The stock still performed. The man performed less. The company didn't suffer. And life, being life, found a way to test what had been learned. It was one of those afternoons that looks harmless until it isn't. The sky wore that thin gray that suggests neither storm nor sun. Mia had a school recital, a small stage, a cardboard backdrop painted to look like a forest, children standing in lines that never stay straight for long. Alexander sat in the second row. People noticed him and didn't, because he had become the kind of presence that doesn't hunger for attention. Elena sat beside him with a program folded in her lap. As the children began to sing, Mia's face went suddenly pale, the way a body sometimes reminds you that getting better isn't a straight line. Her knees wobbled. It wasn't fever this time. It was a wave of dizziness that frightened her anyway. She looked into the crowd, hunting the shape she knew would steady her, and she found two. Elena stood first because she always would, and then Alexander was there, almost the same second, because he had learned how to move toward instead of away. They didn't rush the stage like a commotion, they moved like a decision. The teacher saw them coming and nodded, relief thin and grateful. They brought her off the riser gently. Elena crouched to meet Mia's eyes at level. Alexander gave the space of breath, the one he used to fill with instruction. "I'm scared," the little girl said into the seam of Elena's shoulder, and Alexander heard the confession travel through the woman to him. He sat on the floor in a suit he would once have protected like an asset and said, "Me too sometimes," because truth shrinks fear faster than comfort ever did. Back at the house, they checked the thermometer, checked fluids, checked color. It passed quickly. The body had only needed a small kindness to remember itself. But the moment joined the quilt all the same, because the test wasn't about fever. It was about who they were when a small person faltered. They had answered that question without a meeting. He made a point of telling the staff what they'd done right. He said to the driver, "Thank you for not speeding and making panic worse." He said to the new junior housekeeper, "Thank you for bringing the glass of water the way a sister would." He said to Mrs. Grant, "Thank you for putting a blanket over the chair in the foyer while we waited. It matters that it was warm." Praise landed in places where, for years, only critique had been given a chair. People grew taller, not from fear, but from being seen. On a quiet Sunday, he took Elena and Mia to the wing that had been hers and asked if they wanted to help choose paint. Not from a set pre-approved by a designer, but from little paper squares that looked like invitations. Mia picked a shade with a name no adult would have guessed, Morning Promise, and that became the color of the library wall. Elena chose a soft green for the window seat. Alexander chose nothing and then, when pressed, chose to defer, and in that deferring wrote his name into a new way of being. The painters came and turned choice into warmth. The first evening after, they sat there and read until ink on pages looked like the night itself had decided to tell them a story. There were days he backslid. Old habits are tenacious. He'd answer a call during dinner, and Elena would glance at him over the rim of her cup with a face that asked, "Is this how we want our lives to sound?" He'd hang up. He didn't make a speech. He didn't string his apology to a hedge of excuses. He simply returned to the table and took another bite and asked his daughter about the small politics of the playground. He learned that love is just persistence wearing softer shoes. He kept the leather notebook on his desk, not as a relic or a threat, but as a reminder that someone had once written life into a child's night while he was across the world signing an agreement he couldn't even remember the headline for anymore. Sometimes, when a call asked for him to be less human than he was now willing to be, he would rest his palm on that cover and feel the temperature of his motives change. He would ask himself, what are the 72 hours before this decision? Whose chair am I not seeing? Whose fatigue am I misnaming? He didn't always get it right. He stopped pretending that rightness was the point. Repair was. A year from the day of the fever, the house held a small celebration no one called a party. A cake appeared that tasted like lemons in childhood. The staff gathered without being told. The chef wore a paper crown because Mia insisted kings should take turns. Elena set a candle on the table and didn't say why. The flame made a small, brave light. Alexander looked around and realized the room no longer intimidated him. It felt like a place his heart knew how to stand in. He raised a glass, water not wine, because clarity felt appropriate. He thanked the people who had stayed when he didn't deserve to be stayed for. He thanked the woman who had turned 3 silent nights into a curriculum for his soul. He thanked the small girl for teaching him scale, for measuring his success in steady breaths instead of quarterly reports. He didn't try to seal the moment with a flourish. He just let gratitude occupy the center of the room until everyone's shoulders came down a little. Later, after the cake was gone and the laughter had gone to bed in pieces, he walked the corridor alone. He stopped at the door of the nursery because old habits can be redeemed into rituals. He listened to the hush on the other side, the kind that used to scare him with its fragility and now steadied him with its trust. He remembered the chair, the sleeping woman, the word fired slicing the air like a sentence he never wanted to hear himself say again. He breathed in, breathed out, and said softly into the wood, "Thank you." He meant Elena. He meant the house. He meant the kind of mercy that makes a person possible. If you're here with me at this point, if you've sat through the long, quiet beats and the unglamorous labor and the kind of apology that has to be made daily until it becomes a lived truth, then I'll tell you the simple line we wrote into the foundation of that place. Never judge a moment without seeing the 72 hours before it. It looks good written on a wall, but it works best written on the inside of your decisions. Because one day you will find yourself standing at a doorway, looking in at a scene that begs you to be quick. A coworker late, a parent short-tempered, a stranger clumsy with your time, a caregiver asleep in a chair. Your jaw will tighten. Your old self will reach for the old gavel. And if this story has done its work, maybe you will pause long enough to ask the only question that can save a day from breaking. What has this person carried here that I am not seeing? Would you check the footage first? Not the digital kind, but the human kind. Would you look for the bowls and the damp towels and the little notes in the margins that explain how love wears a body down and builds a life up? Would you check the CCTV first? Drop your answer below. Not as engagement, not as an algorithm offering, but as a promise to yourself that the next time mercy has to hustle to arrive on time, it won't find the door locked by your certainty. And if this story left a small warmth where weariness used to sit, lend it your kindness. Like it if you want others to find it when they need it. Share it with someone who is carrying more than you can see. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more about people who choose the long road when the shortcut looks so tempting. Your kindness keeps these stories alive. I'll leave you with the image that refuses to fade. A small hand finding a larger one in the dark, 3 nights long, and the moment a man with too much to do learned that the most powerful thing he could choose was to sit down and stay. The house still remembers, the quiet, the song without words, the slow cooling of a fever, the heavier cooling of a pride. When morning finally came, it didn't shout. It just laid its light across a chair and a bed and a woman who had given everything she had. And it said the only benediction worth saying at the end of any hard vigil. You may rest now. The rest of us will keep watch.